I did not cry the day she passed away. People around me did. My brother wept in the hallway. My aunt held her scarf to her face. Even the nurse looked away when she switched off the monitor. But I just stood there. I held her hand for a while after it had gone cold. It felt strange, like holding something that was already leaving this world. I remember whispering, "You can rest now." My voice sounded calm, too calm. Inside, I felt something heavy, something quiet. Not pain, not relief, just a deep stillness. We had not been close in the last few years. That truth sat between us long before she was gone. And I thought that was the end of it. I thought grief would come slowly. I thought memories would fade in gentle ways. I did not know that 3 days later, in her small bedroom, I would open a drawer and find something that would change everything I believed about her. Her house smelled the same as always. Soap, warm tea, and old wood. We gathered there after the funeral. Family moved quietly from room to room, touching things but not really seeing them. My brother asked, "What should we do with her things?" No one answered at first. Finally, I said, "Let's take our time." I walked into the kitchen. The cups were still on the rack. Her favorite kettle sat near the stove. I ran my fingers across the table. It was clean, just like she always kept it. She believed in simple order, small routines, quiet mornings. We did not always understand each other, but she built her life around caring for us. That was something I never doubted. I grew up in that house. Every corner carried a small piece of my childhood. I remembered running down the hallway with wet feet. She would shake her head and laugh. "Slow down," she used to say. "This house has thin walls." She was not loud, not strict in the usual way, but she held expectations. Respect, honesty, patience. As I grew older, I stopped seeing her as warm. I saw her as distant. I thought she judged me. I thought she did not approve of my choices. We spoke less, visited less, and somehow, distance became habit. Life moved on. Work became busy. My own family needed attention. Calls became short. Visits became rare. When she spoke, she often asked simple questions. "Are you eating well? Are you sleeping enough?" I answered politely, but my mind was elsewhere. I did not ask her questions back. Not many. Looking back now, that silence feels heavier than any argument. There were chances to understand her, chances to listen. I let them pass. When she became ill, I visited more often. Hospitals have a way of reminding us what matters. She looked smaller in that bed, her voice softer. One evening she said, "You look tired." I smiled and replied, "I'm fine." She nodded, as if she knew I was not telling the full truth. We talked about ordinary things, weather, food, family updates, never about fear, never about regrets. I thought we still had time. Time for deeper words, time for understanding. But time does not ask permission before it moves. The days after she passed blurred together. Visitors came and went. Tea was poured. Stories were shared. People spoke about her kindness, her patience, her quiet strength. I listened. Some stories felt unfamiliar, like they were about someone I only partly knew. I began to wonder, had I missed something? Had I misunderstood her all these years? I pushed the thought away. Grief plays tricks on the mind. That is what I told myself. Until the afternoon, I went into her room alone. Her bedroom was simple, neatly arranged, just as she liked it. Sunlight fell across her dresser, dust drifting through the air. I sat on the edge of her bed. For a moment, I almost called out to her. Habit can be strong like that. Then I began opening drawers, sorting, folding, remembering. And then I reached the bottom one. Inside was a small wooden box, plain, worn, locked. I did not remember seeing it before. I held it in my hands. It felt heavier than it should have, and for reasons I could not explain. My heart began to beat faster. I did not know yet what it contained, only that something inside me whispered, "This mattered." I turned the wooden box over in my hands. It was not beautiful or decorated, just simple wood, slightly scratched with age. The lock was small, old-fashioned, the kind people used before everything became digital and temporary. I looked around the room, almost expecting someone to stop me. But the house was quiet. Only the sound of a clock in the hallway reached me. I told myself I was only organizing her things, nothing more. Still, I did not open the box that day. Instead, I placed it back in the drawer and closed it gently. Some part of me was not ready yet. Some part of me feared what I might learn. The following days filled with practical responsibilities, paperwork, phone calls, arrangements. These things keep the mind occupied. They give structure to grief. My brother and I sorted through documents at the dining table. Stacks of envelopes lay between us. "She kept everything," he said quietly. I nodded. That was her way. Receipts from years ago, birthday cards, medical records. She believed memories should be preserved, even ordinary ones. I realized then how little I kept myself. I lived quickly. She lived carefully. At night, I stayed in her house alone. It felt respectful, also necessary. Silence filled the rooms. Not empty silence, familiar silence. Friends called to check on me. I thanked them. "How are you holding up?" they asked. "I'm okay," I always answered. And it was not a lie. But it was not the full truth either. Grief had not broken me. It had simply placed a mirror in front of me. I was beginning to see things I had ignored. One afternoon, my aunt stopped by. She brought homemade soup, like she always did. We sat in the kitchen together. "She loved this house," she said, looking around. I smiled. "Yes, she did." After a moment, she added, "She worried about you." That surprised me. "Worried?" I asked. My aunt nodded slowly. She didn't always say it clearly, but she carried it. I stared into my bowl. I did not know what to say. For years, I believed she had been distant, critical, reserved. But worry, that sounded softer. That night, I lay awake in my childhood room. The ceiling looked smaller than I remembered. Memories moved quietly through my mind. I thought about our last conversations. Short ones, careful ones. Had she wanted to say more? Had I listened enough? Questions came without answers. And in that stillness, I remembered the box. The image of it resting in the drawer returned again and again. Patient, silent, waiting. The next morning, sunlight filled her bedroom again, warm and calm. I opened the drawer. The box was exactly where I left it. Of course it was, but seeing it there still felt meaningful. I searched around and found a small key taped to the inside corner of the drawer. I had not noticed it before. My hands hesitated as I picked it up. I told myself this was simply curiosity, nothing dramatic. Still, my heartbeat grew louder. The key turned slowly. A soft click followed. I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, many of them, neatly tied bundles, different handwriting, different envelopes. There were also photographs, some familiar, some I had never seen, and beneath them, a journal, dark blue cover, worn edges. I did not touch anything for a moment. I simply looked, because suddenly, I understood something important. This box was not storage. It was memory, private memory, and I was stepping into a part of her life she had never shown me. I chose one bundle carefully. The paper felt delicate. The first letter was addressed to her, dated many years ago. I read slowly. It was written by an old friend. Warm words, shared laughter, nothing unusual. But as I continued reading more letters, I noticed something. She had kept every meaningful connection alive. Even when distance grew, she valued people deeply, quietly, and I wondered, had she felt that same distance growing between us? Had she kept memories of me this carefully too? Eventually, I reached for the journal. I opened it gently. Her handwriting filled the pages, steady, familiar. The first entries were simple. Daily reflections, thoughts about work, family, ordinary life. Then I turned another page, and another. Soon, I reached entries that mentioned me. I stopped breathing for a second, because I realized I was about to see myself through her eyes. Her writing was calm, never accusing. She spoke about my childhood, my growth, my independence, but also about distance. She wrote, "I hope he knows I am proud of him, even when I struggled to show it." I swallowed slowly. I had never heard those words spoken aloud. Page after page revealed small hopes, quiet worries, love that was never dramatic, just constant. And then, near the middle of the journal, I found something that made my hands freeze. A name I did not recognize, and references to something she had hidden. Something she had never told me. I stared at the page for a long time before reading further. The name appeared again and again, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly woven into her writing. It did not belong to any relative I knew, not a neighbor, not a friend she had ever mentioned. Yet she wrote about this person with care, with concern, with something that felt important. My fingers rested on the edge of the paper as I continued reading, each sentence slow, each word heavier than the last. Her entries shifted in tone around that time. Still calm, still gentle, but deeper. She spoke about difficult choices, about responsibility, about protecting someone she loved. She never explained everything directly. She rarely did. Instead, she wrote in reflections, "I hope one day the truth will be understood. I did what I believed was kind. Silence sometimes protects more than words." I closed the journal briefly. My thoughts felt unsettled, because this was not the mother I remembered. Not entirely. She had carried something alone, and I had never noticed. I returned to the box, carefully sorting through the photos beneath the letters. One image caught my attention. It showed her standing outside an unfamiliar building, younger, smiling softly. Beside her stood a child. I did not recognize the child. I turned the photograph over. A date was written on the back, along with the same name I had seen in the journal. My chest tightened slightly. I searched my memory. Family gatherings, holidays, stories. Nothing. No trace of this person. And yet, they had clearly mattered. That afternoon, I walked through the house slowly, holding the photo. I half expected answers to appear around me, in objects, in familiar spaces. But the house remained quiet. I called my brother later. "Do you know this name?" I asked. There was a pause. "No," he said. "Should I?" "I'm not sure." He suggested it might be an old friend, someone from her past. That sounded reasonable, comfortable, but something inside me felt it was more. That evening I continued reading. The entries grew more emotional, still controlled, still measured, but filled with care. She wrote about visits, about watching someone grow, about staying present even from a distance. One sentence stayed with me. "Love does not always take the shape people expect." I repeated that line quietly. It felt meaningful, but incomplete, like a puzzle missing its centerpiece. Sleep did not come easily that night. My thoughts moved in circles. Had she lived part of her life unknown to me? Had I misunderstood her distance all those years? I remembered times she seemed distracted, times she postponed visits. At the time, I assumed disinterest or fatigue. Now I wondered if her attention had been elsewhere, protecting something, supporting someone. The idea did not hurt. It humbled me, because it reminded me how little we truly see of others' lives. The next morning, I opened another bundle from the box. These letters were different, written in her handwriting, addressed to the same name, but never sent. The envelopes remained sealed, unstamped. I hesitated before opening one. Inside were gentle words, encouragement, hope, apologies for absence. She spoke about wishing the best for their future, about trusting they would understand one day. I read them slowly, feeling like I was stepping into something sacred, something private. Piece by piece, a quiet possibility formed in my mind. Not certainty, just a sense that this person had been deeply connected to her life, in a way that reached beyond friendship. I did not jump to conclusions. I simply sat with the thought, letting it exist, letting it settle, because understanding takes patience. And I had already rushed to assumptions once in my life. I did not want to repeat that mistake. By evening, I returned everything carefully to the box, except the journal. I kept that beside me. I knew the answers were somewhere in those pages. Not dramatic, not sudden, but waiting. And as I turned the next page, I felt that same quiet certainty again. I was getting closer to something she had carried alone, something that might change how I saw her and myself. I held the journal for a long time before opening it again. It rested on my lap like something alive, something waiting to be understood. I told myself to move slowly, to read with care, to let her voice guide me. When I turned the next page, her handwriting looked unchanged, calm, steady, just like the way she lived. But the words, they began to feel closer to something important. Her entries spoke about visits to another town, short trips she had taken years ago. I remembered those trips. She used to say they were errands, small obligations. I never asked questions. I trusted the simple answers. Now, she described them differently. She wrote about watching over someone, about bringing books and warm clothes, about sitting quietly during difficult days. She never used dramatic language, only care, only presence. I paused again, because I realized something gently. Those trips were not errands, they were devotion. I began remembering small moments differently. Times she returned home tired, but peaceful. Times she looked thoughtful at dinner, or stayed silent when certain topics came up. I had interpreted those moments as distance, as emotional separation. Now they felt like patience, like someone carrying responsibility without complaint. I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since opening the box, I felt something close to regret. Not sharp regret, just quiet understanding. Inside the box, I found another picture, this one older. It showed the same child again, standing beside her. They were holding hands. I studied their expressions. Comfortable, familiar. There was connection there, the kind that cannot be staged. I traced the edges of the photo with my thumb, trying to place it into my life's timeline. But it existed outside of everything I remembered. A parallel story, running beside mine. I opened another unsent letter, this one longer. Her words were warm and protective. She wrote about wanting to stay close, even when circumstances made it difficult. She apologized for limitations, for silence, and then she wrote something that made my chest tighten. I hope he understands one day that love can be quiet and still be real. I read that line twice, then again, because I realized she was not just speaking to that person. She was speaking to anyone who might one day read it, perhaps even me. That evening I called my brother once more. I think she was helping someone, I told him. For many years. He listened patiently. That sounds like her, he replied. I agreed. It did sound like her. But I did not explain everything yet. Some discoveries take time to share. I wanted to understand more first, to see the whole picture, before placing words around it. Later that night, I reached an entry written with more emotion than usual. Still calm, but heavier. She described a difficult decision, a moment where she chose silence over explanation. She wrote, "Not everyone would understand, but kindness is not always visible." I sat still for a long time after reading that, because I began to sense that her silence with me had not been distance. It had been protection or sacrifice, and I had never considered that possibility. The more I read, the more her image in my mind softened. She was no longer just the reserved parent I remembered. She became someone layered, complex in gentle ways, capable of holding entire stories without needing recognition. I felt grateful and humbled, because understanding someone after they are gone is both beautiful and bittersweet. It teaches patience, but it also reminds us of time we cannot return. By the end of that night, I knew something important. I still did not have the full answer, but I had reached the edge of it. The name, the letters, the photographs, they were all guiding me toward one realization. This hidden part of her life had shaped who she was, and perhaps who I had become. I closed the journal gently and whispered into the quiet room, "I'm listening now." I did not rush the next entries. Something inside me had changed. Earlier, I read out of curiosity. Now I read with patience. I wanted to hear her, not just her words, but her intentions. The journal rested open on the table as I began again. Outside, the evening was quiet. Only distant traffic moved through the night. And slowly, her story continued. She wrote about small visits, simple afternoons, sharing meals, helping with homework, listening to worries. She never described grand events, only ordinary moments, but the care in her writing was unmistakable. She spoke about pride when that person succeeded, concern when they struggled. The tone felt familiar, deeply familiar. It was the same warmth she once showed me when I was young, and that realization stirred something inside me. I began remembering my childhood more clearly, the patience she offered, the steady support. I had taken those things for granted. Reading her journal showed me that her kindness was not limited, not reserved for one path. She gave it wherever she believed it mattered. That thought did not upset me. Instead, it expanded my image of her. She had more room in her heart than I ever noticed. One entry described a place in detail, a small town she visited often. She mentioned familiar streets, a quiet school building, a park bench she favored. The description felt vivid. I found myself imagining her there, walking slowly, carrying a bag, smiling gently as she arrived. This was not a secret built on drama. It was built on consistency. Years of showing up, without needing recognition. Then I reached a short entry, just a few lines, but they carried weight. "I hope he never feels replaced. Love grows. It does not divide." I set the journal down, because I understood something then. This hidden part of her life had never been meant to take anything away from me. She had worried I might misunderstand, and perhaps she had been right. I found myself talking quietly in the empty room. "I don't feel replaced," I said. "I just wish I had known." The words surprised me. They came without bitterness, only honesty, because knowing her now, through her own reflections, felt like meeting her again, not as a child, not as someone expecting approval, but as another adult, trying to understand. At the bottom of the box lay a single sealed envelope, different from the others. It had my name written on it. I stared at it for a long moment. I did not open it immediately. Instead, I held it carefully, feeling the weight of anticipation. Whatever answers remained, they were likely inside. But opening it would also end the mystery. And part of me was not ready for that shift. I walked through the house slowly that night, the envelope still with me. I looked at familiar spaces, kitchen counters, hallway walls. I thought about how many moments we share with people, never realizing how layered their lives are. We see one role, one version, but inside them live countless stories. My mother had carried hers quietly, with dignity, with care, and now it was my turn to listen fully. I returned to the table, sat down, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her handwriting, clear, personal, addressed directly to me. My chest felt tight as I began reading, because I knew this was not reflection meant for a journal. This was conversation meant for me, and whatever it contained would guide me to the center of her hidden truth. I unfolded the letter slowly. The paper made a soft sound in the quiet room. For a moment, I simply looked at her handwriting. Familiar curves, steady lines. It felt like hearing her voice again, before I even read a single word. Then I began. She started gently. If you are reading this, it means I'm no longer there to explain in person. I paused, not out of shock, but because her tone felt so present. She continued by thanking me for my life, for my growth. She wrote about watching me become independent, about pride she rarely expressed aloud. I have always been proud of you, she wrote, even in silence. I closed my eyes for a moment. Those words filled spaces I never knew were empty. The letter moved carefully toward explanation. She wrote about someone she had cared for deeply, someone whose path crossed hers years ago during a difficult time. That child in the photographs, the one whose name filled the journal, had needed guidance, needed stability, needed kindness. She described becoming part of that life slowly, supporting quietly, never replacing anyone, only helping where she could. Her words carried no justification, no defense, only honesty. Then she explained something I had wondered about. She feared I might misunderstand, or feel less important. She worried that explaining would sound like division, even though her heart felt none. I chose silence, she wrote, not because I did not trust you, but because I did not want to place confusion where peace already lived. I breathed in slowly. For years, I believed distance had been neglect or emotional separation. Now I saw it differently. Her quiet had been caution, gentleness. Near the middle of the letter, I reached a sentence that stayed with me. You were never given less of my love. Love is not measured in portions. I read it again, because it shifted something inside me. I realized how often we compare affection, how easily we assume limits. But her perspective was simple. Care expands. It does not compete. And understanding that softened memories I once viewed with doubt. Toward the end, she made a gentle request. She shared the person's name again, the town they lived in, and she asked, without pressure, that I meet them one day. Not out of obligation, she wrote, only if your heart feels open. I held the letter quietly after finishing that line. There was no demand, no expectation, just trust. Trust in my ability to choose compassion. I remained at the table for a long time, the journal beside me, photographs spread out. The story was clearer now. She had lived a fuller life than I knew, one built on kindness I had never witnessed. Instead of feeling excluded, I felt included in a deeper understanding. I whispered softly, I see you now. That night, I walked through the house again, but something felt lighter. The mystery had become meaning. I no longer searched for hidden explanations. I carried her explanation within me. I realized something important. Understanding someone fully often comes late. But even late understanding can heal. It can reconnect memories, restore warmth, and bring quiet peace. Before sleeping, I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope. I kept it beside the journal, because I knew this was not the end of the journey, only the turning point. There was still a path ahead, one she had gently invited me to walk, meeting the person she had cared for, seeing the impact of her quiet love, and perhaps discovering new parts of myself along the way. I woke earlier than usual the next morning. The letter rested on the table where I had left it. Sunlight touched its edges gently. I read the final lines again, not because I had forgotten them, but because they steadied me. Meeting someone she had cared for. It felt unfamiliar, yet it also felt natural. So I decided to go. I packed lightly, just enough for a short visit. As I moved through the house, I paused in each room, not out of sadness, but respect. This place had shaped both of us. I locked the door quietly behind me, holding the key for a moment before placing it in my pocket. Then I began the drive. Travel has a way of clearing the mind, the steady movement, the rhythm of distance. I thought about her again, about the years she traveled this same path. Perhaps feeling hopeful, perhaps tired, yet committed. I realized something as I drove. Love is not always visible in daily life. Sometimes it happens elsewhere, quietly, and we only see its traces later. The town she described was modest, peaceful, familiar in a way small places often are. I parked near the school building she had written about, watched children leaving in groups. Laughter filled the air. I imagined her standing nearby years ago, observing with gentle pride. That image made me smile, because it felt real. Her letter included a simple address, a short walk away. Each step toward it carried anticipation, not fear, just quiet curiosity. I wondered how I would introduce myself, what words I would use, but I reminded myself, honesty is enough. When I reached the door, I paused briefly, then knocked. A young adult answered, calm expression, kind eyes. I introduced myself softly, explained my connection. Their face shifted with recognition. I remember her, they said. She visited often. They invited me inside. The home felt warm, lived in, peaceful. We sat together and talked. They shared stories I had never heard, simple moments, encouragement she offered, books she brought, advice she gave during uncertain times. She believed in me, they said quietly. I listened, and instead of feeling distant from those memories, I felt closer to her because I recognized her kindness, her steady care. It was the same kindness she once showed me, just extended outward. We spoke for a long time, not formally, just to people connected by someone they both valued. Before I left, they handed me something, a small drawing she had kept from years ago, given back to me now. She always said you mattered most, they added. I thanked them and stepped outside feeling calm, not overwhelmed, not conflicted, simply grateful. As I walked through the quiet streets, I realized something important. Understanding her secret had not taken anything from me. It had given something, a wider view of her heart, a deeper respect for her life, and a reminder, we are shaped by kindness both seen and unseen. The drive back felt different, lighter. I carried no unanswered questions, only reflection. I thought about how easily misunderstandings form in silence, and how healing it is to replace them with truth. That evening, I unlocked her house again, stepped inside. The quiet remained, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. When I stepped back into her house, I noticed something subtle. Nothing had changed. The furniture remained in place. The clock still ticked in the hallway. Yet everything felt different, because I had changed. Understanding someone reshapes the space they leave behind. It turns absence into presence in a new way. I placed the journal and letter on the table again, not out of urgency, just companionship. I made tea, the way she used to, carefully, slowly. Then I sat near the window. Memories began to surface, but this time they felt warmer. Moments I once misunderstood now carried gentleness. Her quiet evenings, her thoughtful silences, they no longer felt distant. They felt meaningful. I walked through the hallway, touched framed photographs along the wall. Each one represented a piece of time. I realized something simple. We remember events, but we rarely see the full context around them. She had lived multiple stories at once, balancing care, responsibility, and love. And she did so without asking to be recognized. That humility humbled me. It softened old assumptions I carried. Later, I called my brother again. This time, I shared everything. The letters, the journal, the visit. He listened quietly. When I finished, he said, "That sounds exactly like her." We sat in shared silence through the phone. A peaceful one. Understanding her together created closeness between us two, like rediscovering a shared foundation. That night, I placed everything back inside the wooden box. Not hidden, just respected. I did not feel the need to search anymore, because I now carried what mattered: understanding. I returned the box to the drawer gently. Closing it felt symbolic, not of ending, but of acceptance. For a while, regret had lingered inside me. Regret for questions never asked, for conversations never started. But I realized something important. We all understand life in stages. At the time, I saw what I could. Now, I saw more. Instead of holding regret tightly, one chose gratitude, grateful for the chance to learn, even later than expected. In the days that followed, I noticed small shifts in myself. I listened more carefully to people. I judged less quickly. I remembered how Isley's stories can remain unseen. Her life had taught me that, not through lectures, but through example, quiet example, and I carried that forward. Before preparing to leave the house behind, I walked into her bedroom once more, sat on the edge of the bed. I spoke softly. "Thank you." No grand speech, no dramatic emotion, just sincere appreciation. Because understanding her fully had been a gift, unexpected, and deeply meaningful. That evening, I turned off the lights. One by one, the house rested quietly behind me. I did not feel closure in the sense of finality. Life rarely offers that, but I felt peace. Peace in knowing her story had become part of mine, in a deeper, richer way, and that understanding would continue shaping me long after I left those walls. That night, I sat in her favorite chair. I kept her letter and journal close. I had read them multiple times now. Each time, new details stood out. I realized her life had been more complex than I had ever imagined. Small choices, quiet sacrifices, hidden acts of love, all layered in ways I had never noticed. And I understood something very simple. We rarely see the full depth of someone while they are alive. The regret I had carried for years began to soften. Not vanish, but soften. I had judged her distance harshly, assumed a lack of feeling. Now I knew she had loved fully, in ways I could only see after her passing. I remembered her voice in fragments. "Are you sleeping enough? Have you eaten?" Little questions I had brushed aside. They were her way of showing care. I could hear them clearly in my mind now, even though I hadn't recognized their significance before. I whispered to the empty room, "I see you now. I understand." A small smile touched my lips. It was the kind of smile that comes from relief and recognition, from seeing someone fully, at last. I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar surfaces. The kitchen counter, the hallway, the living room, each place held memories. I recalled moments of quiet frustration from my youth, Times I felt judged. Times I thought she didn't care. And now, seeing those moments through the lens of understanding, they became lessons in patience, in care, in silent support. I realized the mistakes weren't hers. They were mine, my assumptions, my impatience, my limited perspective. I thought about my brother. Our relationship had always been steady, but not intimate. Now, I realized how much we could share, without needing drama, just shared understanding. I considered calling him, but decided to write first. I wrote about the letters, the journal, the hidden truths, and about how she had managed to carry so much love quietly. I pulled one bundle of letters from the box. I hadn't read these in detail before. One letter was addressed to me directly, written years ago. She had intended for me to find it eventually, but only if I was ready. Her words were gentle, full of guidance, not commanding, not dramatic. Live with compassion, she wrote. Trust your heart, even when you don't understand mine fully. Love expands. It does not divide. I felt tears threaten, but I didn't let them fall. I just let the feeling fill me quietly. I realized that the greatest gift she left me wasn't material. Not photographs, not letters, not even the story itself. It was understanding. Understanding her life, understanding her love, understanding how patience and care could shape lives silently. Without recognition, I closed my eyes, let her words sink in, let them shape how I might move forward. I set the journal and letter aside, knowing I would revisit them often, not because I needed answers, but because their presence reminded me of something essential. Love, patience, and understanding are more than actions. They are legacies. I whispered again into the quiet room. I will honor this. I will remember. And with that, I felt a lightness I had not known in years. A soft beginning of healing, peace, and reflection. The next morning, I woke with a sense of calm I had not felt in years. Not a loud relief, not dramatic, just steady, gentle awareness. I moved through the house slowly. Every object, every corner, felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I picked up the journal and read an entry from years ago. She had written about ordinary days, about walks in the park, about the meals she prepared, about quiet afternoons at home. At the time, I had barely noticed the depth of her care. Now, it felt like a map, a guide to the life she had quietly built for herself and for others. I walked to the kitchen and made tea, just as she had done. I listened to the quiet hum of the house. I remembered mornings when she moved quietly between rooms, preparing for the day. I realized how much of her life was dedicated to caring without notice, not for praise, not for recognition, but because it mattered. I whispered to myself, I understand now. And that simple sentence felt like a bridge, linking the person I thought I knew to the person she truly was. I remembered conversations I had brushed off in my youth, her questions about my health, her small, repeated warnings. I used to think she was distant, critically detached, but now I understood those moments differently. She had been attentive, observant, loving, in a quiet way that I had failed to see. I imagined her watching me then, hoping I would grow, learn, and understand life for myself. And she had trusted me enough to do it on my own. I returned to her letter again. Her words felt alive, patient, full of intention. Live with compassion. Trust your heart, even when you don't understand mine fully. I reflected on how I had judged her silence for years, how I had assumed absence or distance, how I had felt regret and missed moments. Now, I realize that love doesn't always demand recognition. It doesn't always show itself the way we expect. And understanding comes in time, sometimes only after someone is gone. I stepped outside into the garden. The morning air was crisp. The wind carried the smell of soil and flowers. I walked slowly, remembering her tending the plants. How she always said, "Patience brings life." I smiled softly, thinking about how literal and figurative those words were. Each flower, each leaf, each quiet gesture she had made over the years, all now felt meaningful. I realized that she had taught me more than I had ever acknowledged, and I was finally seeing it clearly. Sitting on the bench in the garden, I reflected on the journey I had taken in the last week. From grief to discovery, from confusion to clarity, from silence to understanding. I thought about the person she had cared for quietly, the child I had only known through letters and photographs, the life she had nurtured without fanfare. I realized that love could exist quietly, unseen by most, yet profoundly shaping lives. And that same love had always existed for me too. I just hadn't recognized it. I smiled quietly to myself. Not a big, dramatic smile, just a calm, peaceful one. Because I understood her fully now, and I felt connected, not only to her, but to the world she had quietly touched. Her life was not lost in silence. It had grown within me, and I knew I would carry it forward. Before leaving the garden, I whispered, "Thank you for everything, for patience, for hidden kindness, for quiet guidance." I knew now that part of her legacy was mine to carry, to live with patience, care, and understanding, and to notice the love that exists quietly around me, even when it isn't visible. I returned to the house and placed the journal and letter in the drawer carefully. Not hidden, not forgotten, respected. That evening, I sat near the window with a cup of tea. I looked at the quiet house. The stillness felt different, not empty, but full. Full of lessons, full of love, full of life I had never fully understood before. And I knew, as the sun set softly outside, that understanding her was not an ending. It was a beginning. The following morning, I returned to the quiet of the house. The journal and letters had become more than paper. They were living reminders of her life, her care, and the quiet love she carried for everyone. I sat in her chair again, holding the journal on my lap. I read an entry about her daily routines, the small acts of kindness she performed, unnoticed, unseen. And yet they shaped the lives around her profoundly. For the first time, I understood her in layers, not just as my mother, but as a woman who had quietly changed the world in ways I had never known. I thought about her lessons quietly. Patience is more powerful than words. Care does not need recognition. Understanding comes slowly, often only in reflection. I realized I had been impatient with her. I had judged her based on surface impressions. But life had given me the gift of seeing deeper, the truth she had always lived. I whispered softly to myself, "I understand you now." I decided to share parts of what I had discovered with my brother. He listened, captivated, as I described the letters, the journal, the photographs, and the hidden person she had nurtured quietly over the years. "This explains so much," he said. "Yes," I replied, "and yet it's still just a fraction of her life." We talked late into the evening, reflecting on how much of her love had gone unseen, and how much of her care had shaped both of us without our realizing it. Over the next few days, I walked through the house slowly, taking time to observe details I had never noticed. The way sunlight hit her favorite armchair in the morning, the little marks on the walls where she had measured growth, the kitchen counters, still polished from her routines. Everything felt alive with memory. Every object whispered a story of patience, love, and quiet devotion. And I began to see that her life had been full, even in ways I hadn't understood. I sat quietly by the window one afternoon, watching birds land in the garden. I thought about how easily we misunderstand people, How we take distance for neglect, silence for indifference. Her life reminded me that care does not always announce itself. It grows in the background, shaping hearts, teaching patience, and leaving a legacy beyond recognition. I thought about the person she had helped quietly, the child she had guided. I realized that her love extended far beyond me, and that realization softened old wounds of misunderstanding. I decided to honor her legacy not by dwelling in grief, but by practicing what she had taught me. I wrote letters to family members I had grown distant from. I reached out to friends I had neglected. I paused more often to truly listen to people, rather than assuming or judging. Her influence, once hidden, was now shaping me actively, and I felt her presence in those small, deliberate actions. One evening, I called a distant cousin. We hadn't spoken for years. I wanted to reach out. I said softly, "We've lost too much time." They paused, then smiled through the phone. "I'm glad you called. I've been thinking the same." For the first time, I understood the quiet ripple of her influence, her patience, her care, her insistence on gentle understanding. All of it had shaped how I approached life, even without realizing it. I sat in her favorite chair again, the journal open on my lap, the letters beside me. I realized I did not need to rush to closure. I could live with the lessons she had left. I could carry her wisdom forward, allowing it to shape every day, every interaction, every act of care. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with her absence. The next morning, I woke feeling a strange sense of clarity. Not everything had been explained, but enough to understand her heart. I picked up the journal again, slowly turning the pages I had already read. Something was different this time. The words spoke to me more deeply than before. I realized that the hidden parts of her life weren't secrets meant to hurt. They were parts of her that needed space, care, and protection. And in keeping them private, she had quietly shown me the depth of her compassion. I remembered times I had felt overlooked by her, times I had assumed she didn't care, or that I wasn't enough. Now I understood. She had been present in ways I hadn't recognized. Her love had always been there. I just hadn't been ready to see it. I whispered softly, "I understand you now." It was a small statement, but it felt monumental. A bridge had formed between the child I had been and the adult I had become. I walked slowly through the house, touching familiar places. The hallway where she had hung photographs, the kitchen counter where she had prepared meals, the garden where she spent mornings tending the flowers. Each place carried quiet reminders of her life, and I began to realize how much she had shaped my understanding of love, patience, and kindness. Even when I had thought she was distant, she had been guiding me quietly, shaping who I was to become. I sat in her chair and wrote in a notebook of my own. Not long letters, just reflections. Love can exist quietly, without recognition. Patience can heal more than words. Understanding takes time, but it is worth waiting for. I knew I would carry these lessons into my life, not as obligations, but as part of the way I approach the world. I decided to reach out to family I had grown distant from. I wrote letters and sent messages, not to explain or justify myself, but simply to reconnect. For the first time, I understood the ripple effect of her quiet care. Her life had not only shaped me, it had taught me how to carry kindness into the lives of others. I thought about the young adult she had helped so quietly. I realized that understanding her life fully meant acknowledging that influence too. Her kindness had not been limited to her own family. It had extended beyond, carefully, quietly, profoundly. And now I carried that understanding within me. It felt like a responsibility, not a burden, but a gift. I returned to her chair in the living room, held the journal and letters gently, and simply said, "Thank you." No tears, no dramatic emotion, just quiet gratitude for her patience, her love, and her hidden wisdom. I knew that she had left me more than memories. She had left me a way to live, a way to see people, a way to care. I sat in silence, thinking about how much of life we only understand in retrospect. Her life had taught me that, not through speeches, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, intentional living. The days that followed felt lighter, quieter, and yet more purposeful. I began noticing small opportunities to practice what she had taught me, not through grand gestures, but in little ways that reflected her patience and care. I made an effort to listen more attentively to family members, not just hear their words, but truly understand their feelings. I realized how often I had missed those moments before, lost in assumptions and impatience. I called relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some conversations were awkward at first. Old misunderstandings surfaced. But instead of reacting, I paused and listened. One cousin said softly, "I didn't think you'd ever call again." I smiled quietly. "I didn't want to wait any longer," I replied. "And I want to understand better." It was a small act, but it felt monumental because I was living what she had always shown me. Kindness and care do not demand recognition, but they grow stronger when shared. I often thought about the person she had helped quietly, the child she had nurtured over the years. I understood now that her life had extended far beyond the walls of our home. Her quiet acts had shaped lives I had never known directly. And I realized that life is often like that. Most of the care we give goes unseen, but it leaves marks that endure. Her life had taught me humility, and how love can exist quietly, without expectation, yet still transform everything around it. I noticed a shift in myself. I was less impatient, more attentive, less quick to judge. I could see now how my misunderstandings with her had shaped my own assumptions, and I wanted to break that cycle. I began keeping small journals of my own, writing down observations of kindness, gratitude, and patience. Even tiny moments became meaningful because I now recognized their quiet power. I shared her lessons with my brother and even younger family members. We spoke about her quiet devotion, about the acts of kindness that often went unnoticed, and in sharing, her story grew beyond the house she had lived in. I realized that memory alone isn't enough. We honor people by passing on what they taught us, by embodying their patience, care, and understanding in the world. I remembered simple moments in my daily life where I could apply her teachings. Listening without interrupting, offering help without expectation, a gentle word instead of a criticism. Each act reminded me of her, and in doing so, I felt connected to her again, not in grief, but in ongoing presence. Her influence had become part of me, a living, breathing guide in how I approached life and relationships. For the first time, I realized that peace isn't the absence of loss. It's the understanding of it, the ability to recognize love, patience, and care, even when it is hidden. I felt a quiet sense of gratitude swelling in me. Gratitude for her patience, her wisdom, and the depth of her life. Gratitude for the lessons she had left behind, and gratitude for the chance to carry them forward. I closed the journal and placed it gently on the table. The letters rested beside it. I didn't feel the need to read them again immediately. The lessons were already within me, and I knew that moving forward, I could live with her wisdom guiding me quietly, helping me navigate life with more compassion, patience, and love. The following days were quiet but full. I spent long hours simply reflecting. I thought about the years I had misunderstood her, the times I had assumed absence or distance. Now, I could see that every gesture, every word, every silence had meaning. Her life had been rich with patience, care, and quiet love. Even when I failed to notice it, I began looking at my own life with new eyes. How often had I overlooked the love around me? How often had I judged actions, words, or silences without knowing the full story? Her life had shown me that understanding takes time, that love does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes the most important lessons come after reflection, after patience, and after truly listening. I realized that her hidden life wasn't something to mourn. It was something to learn from, something to carry forward. I spent time revisiting old photographs and letters, images of birthdays, family gatherings, quiet evenings at home. Before, I had seen these moments as ordinary, even forgettable. Now, each one told a story of her influence, her care, and her constant, quiet presence. I smiled softly, thinking of her patience, her gentle guidance, and her unwavering love. I began sharing my reflections with family members. We spoke about her life, her lessons, and the quiet ways she had shaped each of us. One evening, my brother said, "I didn't realize how much she had done for us all." "Yes," I replied quietly, "and the most important parts weren't visible at first. We only see them when we're ready." It felt like a healing moment for all of us. Her influence was extending even after her passing, bringing understanding, closeness, and compassion. I thought about how easy it is to misunderstand silence, how easy it is to judge someone when we only see part of the story. Her life reminded me that patience matters, that quiet acts of care can shape lives in ways we may never fully know, and that understanding sometimes comes late, but it is still meaningful, still powerful. I began actively applying her wisdom in my own life, listening without rushing to judgment, offering support quietly, without expectation, noticing the small things others do that often go unseen. Each day, I felt more connected to her memory, to my family, and to the people around me. Her influence was no longer hidden. It had become part of me. I realized that peace doesn't come from closure in the way we imagine. It comes from understanding, from gratitude, and from living in a way that honors those we love. I looked around the house one last time. The journal, the letters, the photographs, they were all still there. But I didn't need them to remember. Her lessons were now part of my heart, part of my daily life, part of my perspective on love and patience. I sat quietly, sipping tea, thinking about everything I had discovered, about her hidden life, her patience, her love, and about the impact it had on me. I realized that the story didn't end with her passing. It continued in the way I lived, the way I treated others, and the way I remembered and honored her. In the quiet days that followed, I found myself thinking less about loss and more about continuity. Her presence was no longer something I searched for in objects or letters. It lived within my choices, my thoughts, and the way I approach people. I understood now that love does not disappear. It changes form. It settles into memory, into habits, into understanding, and it guides us quietly as we move forward. One morning, I packed away the journal and letters carefully. I placed them in a wooden box and set it on a shelf, not as a way of closing a chapter, but as a sign that I no longer needed to hold onto them to feel close to her. She was already part of me. I whispered softly, "I will carry this forward." It felt peaceful, not final, just steady and certain. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Meals were prepared, conversations were shared, days passed in their familiar way. But something inside me had shifted. I listened more carefully. I noticed small gestures. I showed patience when frustration would once have taken over. Her influence shaped those moments. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in ways that made my relationships deeper and kinder. I began sharing stories about her with the younger family members. Simple memories, quiet lessons, moments of care that had once gone unnoticed. They listened with curiosity, and in telling those stories, I felt her life continuing through ours. I realized that memory becomes legacy when it is shared, and love becomes lasting when it is practiced. Looking back, I understood something I hadn't before. We rarely see the full picture of someone while they are still with us. We see fragments, moments, reactions, surface emotions. Only later, with patience and reflection, do we begin to understand their depth. Her hidden life was not about secrecy. It was about kindness without expectation, love without announcement, care without recognition, and that understanding brought peace. One evening, I visited her resting place. The air was calm, the sky fading into soft colors. I sat quietly, letting my thoughts settle. I didn't see everything before, I said softly, but I see now. There was no sadness in my voice, only gratitude, because grief had transformed into understanding, and understanding had become appreciation. As I walked home, I realized the greatest lesson she left me with. We must not wait for absence to recognize presence. We must not wait for silence to understand love. And we must not overlook the quiet care that surrounds us every day. Life becomes richer when we pay attention, when we listen, when we value the small gestures that often go unnoticed. That lesson now guided me, in family, in friendships, in everyday interactions. Now, when I think of her, I don't focus on what was hidden. I focus on what was revealed. Patience, compassion, kindness, and quiet devotion. Her life taught me that love does not need recognition to matter. That understanding sometimes arrives late, but it is never wasted when it comes. And most importantly, that we honor those we love by living what they taught us. So I move forward gently, carrying her lessons in my actions and my heart, listening more carefully, loving more openly, judging less quickly. Her story did not end. It continues through me, through those I share it with, and through every quiet act of kindness that passes unnoticed but changes someone's world. And when I sit in silence, I sometimes feel a calm warmth, as though she is reminding me, love, when given sincerely, never truly disappears. It simply finds new ways to live on. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us of the power of love and understanding.